After 1200 to 1100 BCE, the Mycenae disappeared, and we don't really know what happened to them. There are some theories that they might have been invaded by the Dorians from the north, who would have mixed in with the indigenous cultures. Nevertheless, by that time, we have the end of the Bronze Age, and we enter a Dark Age, about which not much is known. This dark age is characterized by disorganization, and much of the cultural developments that had been forged during the Bronze Age, including writing, was forgotten. The region was open to migration, so smaller tribes moved in. They might have brought with them iron technology. By 900 BCE, small immigrant tribes formed estate groups. These were self-sufficient communities, and some of which spoke in some form of early Greek. And by the 9th to 8th century BCE, city-states start to develop. And we've talked about city-states before, but they are a self-sufficient, self-governing state which has a central urban administrative center. And in this map of the Greek world that I'm showing you, you can see that there were many city-states that started to emerge out of the Dark Ages. But the most important and most powerful of them are Athens, which we can see here, Corinth, which we see here, and Sparta. Athens was a wealthy city-state. It had democracy, and it was known for art and trade. Corinth was the oldest of them and was very powerful. Sparta had militaristic values. They were extremely conservative and had warrior elites that ruled. It's during this time, around the 9th to 8th centuries, when the city-states started to develop, that we start to see the rise of Greece as a culture. And by Greek, I mean mainland Greece. Again, these were independent territories, but they had some common cultural ties that united them. They shared a language. They shared, to some extent, cultures, a history, religion. They had a similar climate, and therefore were responding to some of the same climate challenges. They traded with each other, and they were loosely unified. By the 6th century BCE, Athens has taken over and starts establishing a democracy. And by democracy, I don't mean the kind that we understand today, but a democracy that essentially meant Greek men. Now, because Greek history is so important to understanding the art of this time, I'm going to run down a very brief listing of some of the major Greek historical events that impact the art we're looking at. First is the Persian Wars, which happened between 499 and 479 BCE. Now, this was a chaotic and tumultuous period, as most wars are, but the Greek city-states came together to defeat the Persians, especially after the Persians destroyed and completely sacked Athens in 480 BCE. Athens then defeats the Persian fleet in 479, and this ends the wars. This moment really ushers in a golden age of Greek art, as Pericles, the leader of that moment, uses the treasury of the city-states to rebuild the Acropolis. And we see a blossoming of Greek art. This is the classic period that we'll talk about. The Peloponnesian Wars were fought between 431 and 404 BCE. And they were fought between the Peloponnesian League, which was led by Sparta, and the Delian League, that was led by Athens. So essentially was a war between Sparta and its respective allies and Athens and its respective allies. The wars ended when Athens was forced to surrender, and Sparta won. However, the Spartans had lenient terms and only demanded that the democracy was replaced by an oligarchy of 30 Athenians that were friendly to Sparta, and shut down the Delian League. In 334 BCE, Alexander the Great of Macedonia takes power, and he extends the boundaries of the Greek Empire. In 331, Alexander the Great sacks Persepolis, that great city in the Near East that we studied earlier in an earlier module. And finally, Alexander dies in 323, and this symbolizes the collapse of Greek power. Following that very brief rundown of Greek history, I am now going to give a very brief overview of Greek religion, because religion is absolutely intertwined with Greek art. Stories of their gods and goddesses absolutely pervade their sculpture and pottery, not to mention murals and friezes on architecture. So it's absolutely essential to understand this cast of characters. And of course, it was a polytheistic religion with a very entertaining and colorful cast of characters. This polytheistic religion replaced the earth goddess worship that existed on the mainland Greece. And they had a creation myth that assumed that from chaos emerged the earth goddess Gaia, who gave birth to the sky. The earth and the sky to give birth to 4 giants or titans. Cronus was one of these children and wanted to separate his parents, so he cut off his father's genitals and threw them into the ocean. Now, Cronus was probably worried about karmic payback because when he has children with his sister, he eats all of his children, except for one, Zeus, who tricks him and gets him to eat a stone instead. So when Zeus grows up, he feeds something to Cronus to make him vomit, and he throws up all of his other children. Zeus and these other children are the gods, and they go to live on Mount Olympus. They are gods that are supernatural. They all have supernatural powers, but they all look like humans, and they have human emotions and human flaws. This mythology, this creation story, gives a tremendous amount of content for Greek art because there's so many battles, there's so many different foes. I'm showing you here a late Hellenistic frieze of Athena, who is absolutely bashing the skulls of gods, of the Titans, so beings. Here are some of just the most important gods in this really goofy cartoon table. And I know that you probably have some familiarity with Greek gods, but we should just be on the same page that Zeus is the almighty god, the kind of the king of Mount Olympus. He is married to Hera, who is the goddess of marriage. Athena is very important, the patron goddess of Athens, and the goddess of wisdom, but also war. Apollo is also very important. We'll see him quite a bit. He is the sun god, Ares, the god of war, who also appears quite a bit, and then Poseidon, who vied with Athena for control over Athens. He's, of course, the god of the sea, and he's very identifiable because he's always carrying this Triton. Another thing that is helpful to understand at this point is the categories of Greek art that we will be studying over the next module. Greek art starts in 900 and ends around 31 BCE, which is the fall of Egypt and marks the death of Cleopatra. We start with the geometric period, which goes from about 900 to 700 BCE. And much of the art looks like this, in which we see borders that have this geometric design, a repeating geometric design, and are organized often into many different bands or registers of this geometric design with sometimes a register of figural representation. I'm showing you here the image of the crater that is shown in your book, and also a very lovely example here on the right that you can see at the VMFA. The next period is the Orientalizing period, which goes from about 700 to 625 BCE. And it is characterized by influence from Egypt and the Near East, and often looks like this, in which we see registers that depict mythological beings, hybrid animals, and very busy decoration that also incorporates some floral and geometric motifs. The next period is the Archaic period, and this is the moment when Greek art starts to really look Greek. We see an emphasis on sculpture and the human form. There is an interest in showing anatomy and movement and just a little bit of emotion. We see that when we'll talk about the archaic smile. It's this flickering of life in the face that's represented by just a little bit of the an upturned lips. But it still looks very stiff, influenced by Egyptian art, and will start to look very archaic compared to the classic Greek period that comes next. The classic Greek period runs from 480 to 325, and is further broken down to three subcategories of early classic, high classic, and late classic, but we'll gloss over that for the moment. This is really the golden moment of Greek art that is very much characterized by that moment of unification of the Greek city-states and the supremacy of Athens as a cultural center, and the rebuilding of Athens after the after the Persian Wars end. Hellenistic period, which is the last period of Greek art that runs from 325 to 31 BCE. This period is ushered in by the rise of Alexander the Great, who starts to push the Greek holds out to the Eastern Mediterranean. This period is really characterized by a almost self-doubt. Although we still have that emphasis on the human figure and anatomy, the figures seem to lose confidence and look more emotional, and we see empathy in the figures.